My guest for this episode is Eugene Katchalov, one of Ukraine's all-time money leaders who was forced to flee the country in 2022 when it was invaded by Russia. Eugene's now safely back in Ukraine with his family and has plans to get back into poker with something that he says would benefit recreational players. We talked about the ongoing conflict, the upcoming US presidential election, and his venture into esports with a fellow PokerStars ambassador. Let's get into it. All right, Eugene, thanks so much for joining me here for this podcast interview. I'm very excited to talk to you. As I was just mentioning, you did a great interview with our own Chad Holloway a little over 2 years ago, and this was during, a really pressing time. You're situated over there in Ukraine, and in 2022, when Russia invaded, you pretty quickly fled the country with your family. So I'm hoping to talk to you about all that and more. It sounds like you're back in Ukraine now after being in the Czech Republic for a little while. So, yeah, I normally like starting off talking about people's early life, but since this is kind of a timely situation, let's start out there. How are things going for you right now?
Sure, Connor. Good to speak with you. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, I spent the first 5 or 6 months or so after the conflict broke out in Czech Republic. I mean, I was tweeting about it a lot, so a lot of people are following me along the way. And then at some point, my wife and I needed to come back to Kiev to see because her business is there, and we needed to see what's going on. We came back, and we weren't sure what we were gonna do, but we came back and we were like, oh, actually, we can actually live here again. I mean, it wasn't quite as scary as it seemed at the time, and we didn't really want to be anywhere else, so we decided to kind of move back. So yeah, we've kind of been back to Kiev ever since.
Yeah, and I'm reading Chad's article from when he talked to you, and things were pretty scary back then. There were talks of there hasn't been an escalation like this in Europe since World War II. Are we approaching World War III? Obviously, this is a very long, ongoing conflict, dating back to 2004 or a lot far, or 2014 and plus a lot farther than that. But where are things at right now? Do you still think that it's as scary as it was looking 2 years ago?
Well, I mean, some things have cleared up, some things have not. I mean, obviously, we still don't know about World War III. Obviously, everyone's kind of hoping we're not going there. But in terms of security, look, Kiev itself is fairly secure, I'd say. I mean, there's no immediate threat of like a direct invasion. I mean, there's certainly like attacks with drones and occasional missiles, but for the most part, statistically speaking, it's highly unlikely that you're anything's going to happen to you in particular from anything like that. So for the most part, I'd say it's you know pretty safe. And then what was the first part of your question? Sorry, I lost it.
No, I just really wanted to see, like people were speculating 2 years ago, is this World War III? And I just wanted to see how those concerns played out, but it sounds like it's still
Oh yeah.
ongoing.
Right. Yeah. What I wanted to say is I think everyone kind of realizes that until the US elections are done, that there's not going to be any clarity. I think everyone understands that the US kind of has a big hand in what happens here one way or another with this conflict. So I think everyone's just kind of waiting for the US elections to be over.
That's really interesting. Yeah, we're recording this here at the beginning of October, so just a month away from the US elections, but I hadn't even considered that. Can you talk about how the outcome of the US election will affect those global politics?
Yeah, I mean, I'm no expert, so I don't, all I have is like my opinion, but um, I don't know. I don't like diving into politics too deeply.
Sure.
But I will say that um, it, it's it feels like we're coming towards towards the end of this conflict in some for at least the hot phase of it, at least this first hot phase. But I think there's no way that it can end without the you know leadership from the U.S. And obviously, until there's clarity in terms of who will be the leader in the U.S., there's unlikely to be any kind of clarity here. But I think once the elections are over, I do believe I'm actually I do think like I imagine talks are already kind of ongoing, probably just not publicly. Um, so I'm kind of hopeful that things will start coming down.
Great. And so we're talking about the Russia-Ukraine conflict here, and obviously we have a pretty general poker audience who might not be up to speed on these sort of global political issues. So how would you explain this conflict to, I don't know, maybe somebody, maybe like the average American or yeah, can you just give a kind of a rundown of the conflict? I know it's a complex one, but
Yeah, it's very complex, and I'm probably not the best person to do this. Um, but I would say, you know, you mean you can really go as far back as you want, but I mean, I think generally, people go to 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine, and then starting trouble in the Donbass, and this all started with the president that Ukraine had, who was about to go with Russia, then to make a deal with Russia before all this conflict, but then decided to go into the EU, and I think this is when kind of Russia decided to uh, take matters into their own hands and annex regions in Ukraine, and this started like I would say that was like the beginning of the first phase of the war, and then in 2022 was when like the really hot phase started, was when uh, tanks really started to roll in kind of towards Kiev, towards many different regions. Um, that's kind of when the world really heard about it. Uh, so I don't know. In really broad strokes, that's kind of the way I put it. And we'll see. I think most of the Ukrainian people always look. They want to be like the West. They want to be, I think, part of Europe. They like democracy. They like the Western way of living. Um, but they're kind of stuck with this neighbor that unfortunately there's nothing you can do about it. So they're looking for a way to find basically to at the same time live peacefully, but also live in the Western way. And we'll see how that goes.
yeah. And one of the issues that comes up with politics and global conflicts today is the spread of misinformation just with social media and where technology is at, deep fakes and things like that. Have you noticed any of that being an issue with this conflict? Is there lots of misinformation online or misconceptions about what's happening?
I think there's misinformation from all sides. I think one thing about war that I realize is there's really no angels and there's no devils. Those are kind of like childish ways to look at it. There's just like levels of gray, and there's different perspectives. Depending on whose perspective you're looking at, you can perceive it in different ways. Um, so there's definitely misinformation and propaganda from all sides, and it's very hard to tell um, who's being honest at what point because everyone's trying to, convince, you know, people of their way of thinking. So often it's very difficult. So I try not to dive too deeply into it because I know I'll just kind of get stuck, with one. I don't want to get stuck with one kind of one way thing, one way thinking. So yeah, kind of leave it at that.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you had to return to Ukraine partly because your wife has a business there. How is that business going? Is everything good on that front?
Yeah, she has a clothing brand. She has a bunch of stores around Ukraine. It's going well. And for me, I'm kind of flexible. Obviously, as an American citizen, I could live I could live anywhere. I could come and go also from Ukraine. Unlike Ukrainian men, who are much more restricted than I am. But I do like living in Kiev a lot, notwithstanding the war and the kind of the threat of occasional attacks. There's just a lot of reasons why I like living here. So for now, until something drastically changes, I'll be here. I just can't really think of a better place to be at for me. So also with my business ventures, I do have to be in Europe.
Hmm.
So it would kind of be inconvenient for me to be in the US. So when I kind of think about it, where I'd like to live in Europe for now, it's Ukraine, but we'll see how it goes in the future.
Yeah, you mentioned a few things that I want to talk to you about your business ventures, but also that you are a U.S. citizen, which ended up being relevant when you were fleeing Ukraine because you were able to get through the border pretty easily. But let's go back. You grew up in Brooklyn, New York, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I was born in I was born in Kiev. At the time, it wasn't even Ukraine. It was the Soviet Union. So even when I emigrated to the U.S., it was still the Soviet Union. So I was never actually a Ukrainian citizen. But yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, most of my life until I went to high school in Brooklyn. I went to college, Stern School of Business at NYU. Um, and only once I started playing poker that I really started traveling a lot. And then I moved to Vegas at some point later on. But most of my life, yeah, I grew up in New York.
So when did poker come into your life?
In 2003, I think just kind of when the boom was starting off, kind of a friend invited me to a game, and um, we went to play, and it was really fun. And we just started having like a weekly home game, and then I found out that there's like something called online poker, and started playing online, and I started making a little bit of money on the side, and that's kind of how it kind of took off. Then I started, I traveled to my first series in Atlantic City, then Las Vegas, and had some big hits, and yeah, I just kind of I was really on fire. I really loved poker. I really fell in love with the game.
Yeah, you were definitely on fire. There was a long stretch there where you were absolutely one of the top crushers in the game, and still today you were on top of Ukraine's all-time money list for a very long time. It looks like recently Igor Yaroshevsky won a big high roller that put him a little bit over the top, but 9.2 million in earnings. Yeah, talk about the those days of poker. Yeah, what was that atmosphere like back then?
It was incredible. I think it's probably a bit different than it is today. I would imagine for most people. Back then, there were no learning tools. There were no there. We just kind of everyone just kind of learned on the go, and tried to watch other players and learn from them, and then experiment with many different strategies. It was like the wild wild west. It was fun. I mean, obviously at the time also, uh, no one really knew in which direction poker was evolving. So I'd say like one big misconception I had. I mean, I was also really young, is I felt like at some point there were certain games that I felt like were really really easy for me to beat, and I was like, wow, okay, cool. So if I ever need to make money, I could just always fall back to these games, and I could always make money. And I I underestimated the fact that actually poker would change and the games would change, and but yeah, I just kind of remember those days. Poker in many ways seemed like easy money in some forms.
And it sounds like you would say that that's changed and either the game's gotten more difficult or those softer games have disappeared, it sounds like.
Well, certainly online, it's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Just because I think all the best players tend to congregate online just because of the ease of use. Live games, I mean, they've also changed, but that's when you talk about public games. I think maybe some private games that are more difficult to get into, those may not have changed depending on who's actually in there. If you just have like recreational players who are just having fun, I don't know if those have changed all that much.
Okay. And yeah, so a huge highlight of your career was winning the 2007 WPT Doyle Brunson Five Diamond World Poker Classic for almost 2.5 million. That's obviously a very prestigious event with the Doyle Brunson name and just being a big event back then. But yeah, take me back to that victory. Do you still remember the day you won that?
Yeah, that was probably my favorite poker memory, certainly.
Yeah.
After that, I was like on cloud nine for like 3 weeks or something, I remember. But yeah, that was obviously a life-changing win for me. It allowed me to, kind of gave me the freedom to really travel everywhere I wanted to, and play poker with much more comfort, since my bankroll suddenly became so much bigger. Um, I think with that also came a sort of a name recognition that I wasn't really thinking about. I never wanted to be kind of famous in any way, but then it just kind of came, and I, kind of had to I had to get used to it, and then later on when with the PokerStars ambassadorship, that took it much further. Um, but that's just something I had to get used to.
Yeah, that's one thing that I love about my job is getting to travel and all over the world to go to different poker events. Where are some of the notable places that you've got to go, or what are your favorite live stops?
There's a lot. I mean, I think certainly Barcelona is a classic. I mean, Las
Yeah.
Vegas is always my favorite place to play. Um, Australia was really cool just because like every time I would go there, I would always like take a couple of weeks and just travel around Australia and New Zealand. Um, what else? I mean, there's so many places in Europe. Played in Brazil. I played in Macau. That was fun. Um, yeah, those I'd say are probably like the most memorable, like the best spots to play.
Yeah, those are good ones. I was just in Barcelona and that is a very fun stop. So
Yeah.
definitely one of the benefits of, being in the poker industry for sure. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to ask about is how did Black Friday impact you, and did that have anything to do with you wanting to get over to Europe where there was less haziness with online poker regulations?
Yeah, I remember Black Friday. I was like in the middle of a session. I was playing poker. I was playing a high stakes cash game on PokerStars, and then Black Friday happened, and I didn't know what was going on. But yeah, that was a funny time. I didn't move to Europe initially because I mean I did play online a lot, but it wasn't to the degree like it wasn't that important for me to actually have to completely um physically move to Europe, uh, just simply because I played live as well quite a bit. So I couldn't play online, but I played live, and then when there were online series, I would just like go to Canada or go to Mexico and play those, and then just come back.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. I know there were people whose livelihoods were affected and they used online poker as like a primary source of income. So lots of
Right.
lives upturned during that period.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know a lot of people who were like that, but unfortunately, I wasn't like 100% online player. I was, probably like 50-50 or something like that.
Gotcha. And so after, really being at the top of the poker ecosystem for a while, you ventured into esports and you have a company there. Talk about what got you interested in gaming and what sent you down that road.
Yeah, this was like in 2016. I became really good friends with Luca Pagano, who was also an ambassador for PokerStars from Italy. We became kind of close friends, and we had this idea that we had this mutual interest in esports. It was this like growing industry, and we saw a lot of similarities between that and poker in many different ways. And we just wanted to see. We felt we wanted to see how if we could take the lessons that we learned from poker and apply them to esports, perhaps with a slightly different approach. Um, but basically, what that evolved into was we wanted to build um, a platform and organize events, esports events online for our community of players. Similar to how you would do so in PokerStars, but not necessarily for money, but do so basically for sponsors and um, basically provide exposure to our sponsors, both through organization of online events and offline events, and then also have a and basically have a large community of our own that we would grow through having teams that participate through our brand.
Yeah, and I know a lot of former professional esports players or former poker players kind of there's definitely a connection there where there people who are competitive in one environment seem to be so in another, but what are some of the similarities you see between the esports community and the poker community?
Yeah, it's very similar. I mean, I think the amount of work that is required for you to play at the highest levels are very similar. You know, and also like just aspects of competition, like even like the physical aspects, even though it's more like a mental game, both poker and esports. Like how important the working out is, or eating healthy, or being able to work. I guess in esports, it's more important to work as a team because there's some there's some games that are team sports. Um, but still, I think just psychologically being, knowing your opponents and knowing your teammates, that those are things that are kind of um, similar between poker and esports. So I thought, considering mine and Lucas past, we thought we could really provide something for esports, given our experience in poker.
Are you a big gamer? Is that something that you enjoy in addition to poker?
I was a really big gamer. I think even like before poker and maybe, in the beginning of my poker career. Then I think as I got older, I enjoy watching games because when I start playing, I realize like I'm so bad. I just need like it would take a lot of time for me to get really good at a game. So I just find it easier and more relaxing to just watch a game and appreciate high level play. So I enjoy that more. But in terms of playing myself, I guess I probably just only stick to poker.
Gotcha. So yeah, you ventured into esports and stopped playing poker full time. What sort of a role does poker play in your life today? And are you playing more? We did see you at the 2020 WSOP a few years ago. Or are we going to see you at more live stops?
Yeah, I've barely played. That was, that was I did make it out for the World Series in 2022. Or was it no, was it 22 or 23? 22, yeah, yeah. And then I haven't played in over a year and a half. I am gonna play a little bit more now. But not I've kind of always dreamed to not play as a professional. I want to go I want to return to poker but just play like recreationally. Have fun and also um show the fun side of poker, as I like to call it, to people and um basically try to promote what made poker fun for me in the beginning. I think that's more applicable to over 99% of players, because most of them are not looking to become a pro player. I mean, there's this dream about becoming a professional poker player, but I think realistically speaking, very, very few people actually achieve it. So I think it's more realistic uh, to just kind of show poker, show how fun poker could be for people who are actually just looking to get fun out of it rather than to uh, make it a job.
Yeah.
And also I think there's certainly plenty of tools now that help people become pro. So I don't think I can really add much in that direction anyways.
Yeah, I listened to a recent interview you did with Card Player Lifestyle's Robbie Straczynski, and it sounds like you're planning on doing a business venture kind of in this space and a way to help out recreational poker players. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I can't talk too much about it now, but I can talk about the problem that I see with poker, and the biggest problem that I see with online poker specifically. Um, the gap between professional players and recreational players, I think, is growing wider and wider because there are so many tools available with solvers, with AI, that just make players extremely good versus recreational players who are just logging in to have some fun. So I think that's a problem for the poker ecosystem because ultimately you need new players to come in to bring new money into the game. But I feel like from the perspective of a potentially new player who's looking to play for fun, they may get a bigger bang for their buck at a roulette table or at a slots or a blackjack nowadays versus poker, which this is something that was not the case maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but probably is the case now. Also with the big problem with the bots online. So I think that's a problem for online poker. Not so much for live poker, but for online. And I do think that needs to be addressed in some ways because it's not sustainable.
So, what are some ways that you think operators or tournament runners or can make the game more appealing for recreational players? I think some of the things you've said that are positive are like turbo structures or bomb pot events or things that kind of decrease the edge that a pro may have. Yeah, what are some solutions?
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much you can. I mean, I wouldn't really touch the game itself because then it's not. It wouldn't be. Let's say if we're talking about Hold'em, I wouldn't really change the rules of Hold'em all that much because then it's now you're talking about a different game, and I don't think that hasn't proven to be particularly popular amongst players. But changing things around the game is where I think you can. I think you can really help. So yeah, like bomb pots, turbo structures. One other example I saw recently, I saw in the Triton Cash Game stream, they had this squid game, which I thought was incredible. Like I just, that's a great example of what I'm talking about because basically that game completely changes the dynamics of the game, and there's a lot more limping involved. There's a lot more aggression involved. So it really stimulates people to play in completely different ways, in ways that have not been solved. And I think this is like what I love about poker, where you kind of have to really figure it out on your own, rather than have the solution be given to you. So I think things, in that direction. I think another direction you can take it to is like potentially increasing variance in poker in some ways, because I think when you increase variance, uh, that obviously causes either larger losses or wins. But even when you're talking about a professional player, if they're in the downside of variance, right? If they're in the middle of a large loss, emotions come into play more, so they may play worse. So that I think variance can also impact the way someone plays. So I think that that's another way you could think of it. But just introduce basically like looking at it from the side, not touching the game itself too much, but just around it, and um, not not allowing the game to be so solvable, so easy, and also and I think also recreational players like variance, so I think increasing that as well.
Increasing variance, that's good. Obviously, we talked about Black Friday, but another hindrance to growing the game or getting people into poker is just different regulations of online poker. There's not a lot of online poker in the US post Black Friday. It's only legal in a few states. It does seem to be better and more open over there in Europe, but what are some poker regulation issues that you think could be addressed or should be addressed to grow the game?
Um, I mean, certainly, I think the big problem with a lot of countries' approach is when they try to kind of segregate their population just to their own regions, and then they don't work with other regions. And I think they probably just don't realize how poker works. They don't realize that poker needs masses of people to work. It needs a thriving community, because if you don't have a thriving community, people will just not log on and play. So it'll just be like, it'll just be dead. Um, and also, I think in terms of how they tax, it's kind of different in different regions. But sometimes if you tax too much, it also kind of makes it not sustainable. Um, so I can't really, I don't know the details enough to really uh, tell you anything more specific than that. But I think those are two kind of major issues that I've seen in the past, and I think still to this day.
Yeah. Well, definitely a lot of work to be done to getting recreationals into the game. So we definitely look forward to hearing more about the work that you've got going on. But going back a bit to when you were in college, you did study business and entrepreneurship. Is that right?
I did, yeah.
So it sounds like you've always had that, I don't know, business oriented side to you and seemed like you would start something like this.
Yeah, I think it was like after playing poker for over 13 or 14 years, I was just kind of thinking to myself, do I really want to continue be a professional poker player for the rest of my life? And I was like, when I'm like 50, 60, and like that just didn't sound appealing. Like I love the game of poker, but I love, I wanted to play it recreationally. I didn't want to play professionally because there's also a lot of like stress involved, obviously. Obviously, it's not like once you're a pro, you could just like lay back and make money at it. Obviously, there's also a lot of work that needed to be done. So and on the other hand, I've also always dreamed about starting my own business and doing something in that regard. I mean, I have always taken my poker winnings and kind of invested them in different businesses anyways, but I kind of wanted to be more hands-on in certain things as well. So that was definitely always the dream for me. And then to just like kind of return to poker and just play recreationally, just play for fun.
Yeah, that's great. And so after being, you came up, you mentioned the moneymaker boom was when you got into poker, and then when you won these big WP titles and things like that, it was really just kind of the heart of the poker boom. Do you think poker's lost, I don't know, a bit of its magic since then? Do you think the game's become too mechanical? Do you think there aren't enough characters in the game or anything like that?
In some ways, I do think so. I mean, the game is still growing. I mean, at least I put it this way. The way online poker is today, I'm kind of pessimistic on online poker because of the reasons I mentioned, because of the gap and because of the bots. But I am very optimistic on offline poker. I think that's going to continue to grow, and I think we are seeing that. And I think with the recent acquisition of the WSOP by GG Poker, I do think we'll see those numbers continue to rise. Um, so the game has definitely changed. Um, uh, but I don't know. It's like it's just like you don't really know which way it's going to evolve. But it's um, I mean, you certainly didn't know this 15 years ago. But I think the game is still fun. It's just like in a different way.
Yeah. Well, great. So now there's just some more general questions that I'd like to ask just to kind of pick your brain a little bit. And I'm still trying to figure out the best way to ask this question because I want to ask what's a book you'd recommend, but I don't know, not everyone has a book off the top of their head. But what's either a book or something that you've read or something that you've watched that really inspired you and that you'd recommend to people?
Well, I think a recent book that I've read is like nothing poker related, but I mean, I put it's called Awake by Dr. Angelo DeLullo. It's just about um kind of like non-duality and like meditation, and I don't really know how to describe it, but th I went in like a silent retreat and I've been like meditating because of that book, and I found it very helpful and very um helpful in my life in general. Maybe you could say like on a spiritual level. So I think it's not related to poker, but it's related in the sense that it helps you with stress levels. It helps you with kind of like the larger idea of life, the larger idea of what everything is. So I'd say that.
No, that's great. Definitely looking for answers outside of poker and, books that are generalizable. That actually goes well with another question that I wanted to ask, which is, what's your favorite life lesson that can be drawn from the game of poker? You mentioned that this book had some parallels, so yeah.
Yeah, I'd say a major lesson. Well, from not from the book, but between poker and life, I'd say is that uh, the idea that you can make the right decision. I mean, you can be right about your decision, but it doesn't mean that the outcome is going to be what you want it to be, because there's still kind of luck involved, both in poker and in life. You can and you just have to kind of realize that even if you make all the right decisions, it doesn't mean that the outcome is going to always be what you want it to be or what it should or what you think it should be. So I think the idea both in poker and in life is just to kind of have enough quote unquote bullets to keep trying. At some point, luck will favor you, but just got to make sure that you don't run out of bullets.
That's a great answer. Can't run out of bullets. And
Yeah.
yeah, looking back at your poker career and your business ventures and everything, what is a piece of advice that you'd give to your younger self?
I think the biggest advice I'd give to my younger self is uh, to network more with others. I was kind of I'm I'm definitely much more of an introvert as a person. Um, but I think as I got older, I realized how important it is to just still still network and talk with others, and discuss ideas with others, and get get help with certain things. I probably didn't appreciate that as much when I was younger. I was just kind of like I kind of like to do things on my own. Also, when it came to poker, um, but I think I think something that you often see now is like a lot of the top poker players are part of groups that always discuss strategy together, kind of moved up together. Um, so I would say that's probably like the biggest advice I'd give to myself is like just be more open, be kind of talk to people more, network more, something like that.
And with that in mind, who's a mentor of yours, or who's somebody who's really inspired you, or if you look back, you're like, yeah, that person had a big impact on my life.
Person that's inspired me or had a big impact in my life. Um, I mean, across all my life, I'll say it's probably my parents, and specifically probably it's probably my dad because he also comes from a kind of like a gambling background, and um, he even though he doesn't play poker itself, he just taught me some ideas about what it's like to gamble professionally. One important aspect that he taught me is like that it's really important to know how to lose, because a lot of people who go into this, they don't you don't really think about that in the beginning. But poker is not a game where you can consistently win. That's just not realistic. And it's great when you're always winning, but when you encounter losses, this is where kind of you either shine or you don't. Because if you encounter a long losing streak, it can really bring people down. So those people who know how to handle themselves well during losses, have a chance to make it professionally.
Yeah, that's great. I'm also someone who learned poker from my dad, and that's how I
Mm.
got introduced to the gambling world. So, that's a great answer. All right, the last thing that I want to ask, and this will be especially interesting to ask you since you're in a war-torn region, but what is something that makes you hopeful?
What is something that makes me hopeful? Um, it's like something that I realized in my life is that life has a way of ups and downs all the time, but and then when you're in the middle of a down period, it can often seem like there's no way out, and you're not kind of hopeful. But at the same time, time passes by, and then you're back up into kind of like a good period. So I think something that life teaches you is that like things will be okay. You don't know at the time how they'll be okay, but you can be confident they will be because your kind of past always shows that. Um, that things will resolve one way or another, and it's generally in unexpected ways. But I think that's something that makes life very interesting as well. So I think just appreciate the good and the bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Eugene, it's been really great talking to you. I appreciate you taking the time, especially, calling over from Ukraine, and we hope you stay safe over there and that your family's good, and definitely look forward to hearing more about the next things you're going to be doing in poker.
Thank you, Connor. It's been fun talking to you, and maybe I'll see you in December. I might be in Vegas
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you're
I
there.
also wanted to say hopefully we'll see you at a live stop. So yeah, I'll hopefully Vegas in December.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Thanks so much.